Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Dynasty Underdog. I'm your host, Uriah Dawkins, with me tonight, Billy Beeman and Jake Kornblum. What's going on, guys?
I think you got those points in the wrong direction. But there you go. There you go, Jake. Yeah, there you go. You went the opposite way. But yeah, for those on the YouTube channel. No, good. Did not expect to get Jake on the show so soon. So I'm excited that we get to go through the DU5 Dynasty Startup draft review. It was a really fun draft. Went through it pretty quickly. So yeah, man, that's a highlight for tonight other than the prospect profiles. But yeah, Jake, how you doing?
Good, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, to Billy's point, I'm surprised I'm here, but we powered through that startup, and I figured might as well kind of hit on it while our thoughts are fresh. And the longer I sit on that startup, I think the more I'll hate myself for it. So might as well get my thoughts out immediately before we go into the mental decline process.
Therapeutic. Yeah, we'll work through it here for sure.
All right, let's hop in some fake news and nonsense. So somebody that probably has way too many followers on social media said, "Hey, Gronkowski, he's getting fit. He's training in altitude. He's coming back, and Sean Payton loves him." And it was cool. The internet ran with it for like 6 hours, and then the people who actually are insiders were like, "Nah, that's not a thing." So you may have noticed Gronkowski getting picked up in a bunch of your dynasty leagues.
Billy.
And two, or maybe
and
three.
You're going to see him dropped in a bunch of dynasty leagues tomorrow.
Send him out for a fourth right now.
Shout out to anyone who got anything. So, yeah. So, am I interested? No. And what would you sell him for today? Literally anything.
Okay,
the next thing is,
I think that does it.
Kelsey is returning.
It covers
so
everything.
This is
Thank
good.
you for that.
Yeah, he had a 1 year left on his contract, but I mean, I remember being in a startup, being like, "Oh my god!" Like, we could talk about it later, or no, we could talk about it now. It's like I think Billy picked him up in the 14th round or 13th round, and that's about where like it seems like, because obviously I was interested in getting Kelsey at some point too, right? I think we all were. Like, there's a point where it's like, okay. But I really, for me, it was just like, I need to have a starting roster. I can't waste a pick that possibly might not play this year as like even my 10th guy on my 10 team roster. So I waited long, but Billy did capitalize, got him in the 14th, and apparently he's going to play 1 more year. So shout out, Billy.
Yeah. I mean, shout out to a lot of people, I'm sure, taking advantage of the fall in value in startups or just in trades, right? So I think it's just a good bet at that point. That's really all it was. And in terms of like, I think that fit my team more than anything, like, because I do have a couple, older guys on the roster. But yeah, I think him being 35 and the risk of him just like auto retiring is definitely, reason enough to let him fall, to the 10th roundish. After that, I think, you're basically, the upside is too great to pass up. And that's kind of where I went with it. Given that he's now back for another year. I mean, it paid off. Obviously his value is going to at least sustain, if not increase by a little bit for, point scoring season, if you really wanted to get off of him or something like that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's fine for anybody who has him on like a rebuilder. This is your time, just get out, but I'll leave it at that. Jake, you have any extra thoughts?
Honestly, not really. I guess I missed it. Was this confirmed today?
Yeah. I saw the news today. That's why I put it on here.
Huh. Okay.
Quote unquote, he's pumped.
It was like a Rappaport tweet or something.
Oh, from the GM, right? Like the GM had made like a comment about him wanting to return.
Yeah, something like that.
Or he's fired
he's
up
coming
or something
back
like
for
that.
another year. Yeah, that he's basically returning for the final year of that deal, or at least one more. I guess
technically it doesn't mean that he.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I don't feel that confident in that report per se, but I think regardless, it is important to kind of like move off of this news in its own particular way. If you really wanted to Billy's point, I do think that there's probably certain builds, regardless of it being a rebuilder. I think a contender can also probably get off of this news if they really wanted to get into some current assets. I think you can probably move this for a second right now and feel pretty confident in your return, not to play with those games. But regardless, this is exciting. This is fun. I think this is good news for the NFL. Honestly,
the vibes are great. The vibes are immaculate.
I do. I think that this is good news for the NFL. You know, they had to get another year of Taylor Swift in the press box and talking about that bullshit. And maybe that's what they're going to do. Is they're going to try and force the hand of another Super Bowl so you can finally propose at the Super Bowl like we all wanted.
Oh yes, that's what we're all waiting for. Uriah is just like, I'm gonna let that breathe, and we'll continue.
Well, while Jake's on his bullshit, how would you like to tell us about this topic you were thinking about? So, trading counterintuitiveness and protective measures.
That's a professional transition right there.
That was really, really well done. So this came about when I started interacting with just some trades this offseason. I started thinking about kind of like the way in which people trying to engage yourself like through trades. And it's funny because I actually did something similar to this right after I received some of these really bad trades. And I sent Uriah basically a counterintuitive trade almost immediately after, just to kind of test the waters. So I guess like my point here is that there are ways in which you can engage trades, but not necessarily like truly understanding the scope or the kind of the direction of the team that you're moving with. So Uriah, maybe this will make more sense to you to think about the trade that I sent to you directly. I sent the 103 Tyreek Hill and like the 210 for Trey McBride in a 0.5 tight end premium league. Yes. Now, the 103 and Tyreek Hill plus the 210 for Trey McBride is equivalent to, if you put it into some calculator, like a huge overpay for Trey McBride. But yet, for some reason, you know, this trade is not particularly attractive to Uriah for obvious reasons, right? Like there's a lot of work that Uriah would have to do to get the most value out of that trade, because he would then have to go out and trade Tyreek Hill at his peak, whatever that looks like this upcoming season, blah, blah, blah. Now, the reason I threw that out there was to kind of test the same degree of, you know, craziness that people put into the trades that they send me. It's like, you know, maybe if they thought it would work on me, maybe it can work on somebody else. I already know that Uriah has, you know, his shield up, blocking away my garbage trade offers all the time, especially for Trey McBride and CD Lamb, and maybe even some Dak Prescott. What I really wanted to do is just kind of bring up a couple of steps to help benefit yourself when this does occur. So the biggest thing that I think is really important when you're receiving a trade offer is to really start thinking about what the other person's intent is. And one of the biggest things that I tend to do, and I think I need to move away from, is like the auto reject to kind of send a message, because I don't think that that actually helps you in any particular way as the trade receiver. And one of the reasons I say that is like, no matter how terrible the trade is, you're constantly trying to make and provide some type of relationship with that other trade partner. Now, if you just auto reject something without sending a message or providing any type of context in this process, what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that engagement ends up dying out in the long term. So one of the big things that I would kind of recommend.
I don't want you to send me any more shit offers.
That's fair. That's completely valid. No. You're completely right. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to kind of try and understand like what someone's intent is. So the example that I have here, I got back-to-back trades from the same guy with the same players, and it was Jalen McMillan and Trey Benson for both JJ McCarthy was one trade, and then right after that was for Drake May. And I started trying to think about this just logically, and I'm like, wait, is this guy saying that Drake May is equivalent to JJ McCarthy? And then also, is he also saying that Jalen McMillan is plus Trey Benson is equivalent to either of those quarterbacks? So funny enough, I plugged it into KTC, and of course, for JJ McCarthy, it was equivalent. For Drake McBride, it wasn't. Or sorry, Drake May, it wasn't. And so I still got Trey McBride on my mind. And so I then started thinking to myself, like, what is this guy trying to do? Like, is he trying to buy off or like sell off the hype of Jalen McMillan? Like, what is he getting at in this deal that I'm just like really missing out on? Because I thought the valuations were so off that I didn't I had to plug it into KTC to basically be like, is that what the market, quote unquote market, the superficial market is telling him is accurate? And here's the other funny kicker to the league is that the league is maneuvering every single year. There's roster construction changes. And the league went from basically 2 QB or a QB and Superflex to a QB and 2 Superflex this upcoming year. So quarterbacks are even more valuable, and he's not even partaking that value into the trade. So what I would kind of suggest to the audience, as well as just people listening in, is a couple of things. Really make sure that you're understanding your league dynamics completely, right? Like if you're in a league that QBs are going to be more sought after, put together some type of trade that looks significantly more appealing to your league mates. And when you're putting together these counterintuitive trades, at least try and gauge why you're trying to be counterintuitive, right? Like I think so much of the work that we end up doing is almost lazy when we come to play fantasy football because we have our lives, we have so much else that we're doing that we end up almost detaching ourselves mentally from the process. And the reality is that so much of the process is that engagement factor, right? Like the engagement with your league mates. And if you fall off from that process, you end up just fucking yourself over later in the league process. So, the next time that this guy sends me a trade, I'm most realistically going to have some blurred image of, Drake May for Jalen McMillan and Trey Benson stuck in my mind. And I'm going to be like, I don't even care how even this trade is. Like, you're going to have to now pay a premium because you put me through that terrible experience in the past. So all of this to say, thanks, but no thanks. Put forth the effort and really kind of help your league mates kind of interact with you based off of the way in which you try to present yourself. And then on the flip side, as the person receiving these trade offers, just be cognizant that, your other trade partner's intent might be pretty malicious, and to the point where it's like, just truly just taking advantage of market value instead of really understanding kind of the bigger scheme of things. But that's really all I had to say. If you guys have any other points or comments, feel free, but that's really the kind of a more of a PSA that I had.
No, I mean it's good stuff, especially I think the last point in terms of like the stigma that comes with those kind of offers or malicious strategies with malicious intent, that kind of thing. I know people in our leagues, there's certain league mates that have rubbed others the wrong way to the point where they don't want to trade with them based on not interactions that are like, oh, this person's not a nice guy, but it's more like the way that they strategically approach the game is kind of distasteful to some, and so that can linger into future trades and cause some issues there. So I definitely see that. The only other thing that I kind of noted when you were talking through that was like, the auto reject and that not really getting the right message across or the message that you want to get across. And I think, I wrote before you said, I think the auto reject is fine as long as you follow up with like a comment, or if you're like, because generally I'll either say like, this is why I'm not doing this, and it'll either keep going from there and maybe we have, a trade negotiation go on, or, you might say, like you said, because you understand. I think what's interesting about the one you got is like, you understand he's trying to get rid of these two players. So it's like, if you understand what somebody's trying to do, then maybe if you're interested, you can actually attack it in a realistic way rather than, move off of the Drake May and be like, hey, I see what you're trying to do. I don't value this at all, like close to what you are, sending me. But if you really want to move off these guys, I would be interested in taking them on at XYZ cost, or if you want to negotiate. And I think that's how you kind of can like facilitate these things, kind of how Jake's talking about. But that's all I got for that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Tommy here real quick before we move on. What's up, guys? Shout out Superflex Super Show. Dig in the content this offseason. Keep it up. Really appreciate you, Tommy. Always appreciate the comments and being here. Thank you.
Absolutely. The only thing I have to add, which is not really useful for anyone, just allows me to shit on Sleeper a little bit. At least in MFL, there's a little box where you could write a comment before you reject. Sleeper, you have to reject, but then you have to go to your DMs and then find that person, and then it's just an added step that I don't really have time for.
So challenging.
No, I always write something back, depending. there's like two people that send me just bizarre offers all the time. I just auto reject and never say anything. But and then Jake, it's like, why do I need to tell him? Like we talk weekly basically. He's got my phone number.
He knows why I'm rejecting this offer.
You know,
Exactly
I
what he's
did.
doing.
Before I sent it, I knew he was going to reject it, but I figured.
Yeah, I was looking at that
This
103.
trade-
I was looking at that 103, like, man, I don't know, but
Yo,
not for that.
Jake sent you. What does Sleeper say? Jake sent you a time sensitive offer. It's going to explode in 1 second because he knows you are not going to accept that.
Oh, I better accept it. No.
Oh man. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff, guys. I like that, Jake. That was a good one. I dig it.
All right. So we did again, man. We're just going on. This is Dynasty Underdog Listener League number 5. I mean,
Big time.
when we filled 2, I was like, wow, like this is pretty cool. So to get to 5 is
It was a little harder to fill back then. Now it's like, hey, it's amazing.
it's cool.
You're like, we're starting a league up and it's like flooded. Like, oh my God. I'm like, damn, I wish I had the capacity to start 2 a year, but I can't do that, guys. And it's it loses some of the flair otherwise too, right?
So we will talk about it. I think Billy and or Jake will have the ability to throw up our draft board on the screen.
Oh,
as
yeah,
we talk
let me do
about
that.
this. Jake is
go.
very good with the history of these things. He'll remember trades and stuff that happened that I just totally forgot about. So this is really
The
good.
Dynasty historian.
The Dynasty historian. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize Gordo made all these trades. So, but let's talk about the draft a little bit. Things that stood out to
You
us.
just didn't see him
anomalies.
making picks. That's why.
Yeah. Shout out Gordo though, pretty good player.
I think he was like 6 or 7 players short by the end of the draft,
Yeah.
which was pretty amazing. Especially because I had sent him an offer at some point during the draft, and he was like, "Oh no, it's gonna put me way over my total number of players." And I'm like, "I don't think that's right." And he was like, "No, I'm pretty sure." I'm like, "Okay, I won't push you any longer. Don't worry."
It's the proper productive struggle type deal going on there.
Yeah,
We'll step on full screen. All right, so maybe I won't do full screen. We'll do it like this. So this is a good question. So obviously this is probably coming from Jake. Quarterback attack in an anti-quarterback scoring superflex structure. As you can see, our first 7 picks were quarterbacks. 8 out of the first 12 in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
The short and curly of it it's still superflex, but just for heads up, this is DU5. It's different, so it's 4 points for passing touchdown, but you get nuked. Like pick 6 is -3, which is not, a normal setting. Interception still -2. That's pretty normal. 0.1 for a completed pass, -0.12 for incomplete pass, and if a quarterback takes a sack, that's -0.25. So it does nuke the quarterback a little bit there, especially ones that process really slow. Just for me briefly, like I still think that the fact that it's super flex, I don't think that the nuking of the quarterback scoring is enough that would make me not choose a quarterback in the first 6 picks.
That's a fair assessment. No, that's a fair assessment. Let me just say, in terms of the scoring, before we get into everything, I just laid out the quarterback scoring for wide receivers and running backs. There's also it would be 0.25 per first down, and then it's tiered PPR, so it's going to be 0.5 for running backs, 1 point for wide receiver, and then 1.75 for the tight end. So we boosted the tight end up, a little extra for them. So that's why you'll see them a little bit higher in some regard here. So just wanted to lay out the point scoring there. The QB is obviously very drastic difference compared to the normal league. I agree with your eye though, for the most part, with like the first 6-ish picks, 5 to 6 picks probably. I mean, I do think, I don't know what Jake's laughing about specifically. I think just in terms of the first round, I think CJ Stroud stands out a little bit to me in the quarterback group that went there. Like I get the allure of Stroud. Like he obviously looked amazing year 1 and he could bounce back in year 3 for sure. So, but just with the quarterback scoring, with kind of those nuances, I think that, for me, you could see at pick 12, if you're on the, YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube. But if not, I didn't pick a quarterback until round 4. So I did kind of avoid the early-ish quarterback personally because of the scoring. I figured, if I'm not going to get in one of those top 5 or 6 quarterbacks, like it's not really, what's the point, and I may as well load up on the other positions that are going to matter and have, a high war in this area type thing. So what did you think about that portion of the draft, Jake? Sorry, one more thing I wanted to add. I don't think in general, overall, like as a general statement, everybody adjusted to the scoring settings enough. And so I think that is kind of part of this conversation, but go ahead, Jake, jump in.
Yeah, that is kind of why I threw that question out there. Cause I actually, my initial thought was to go after the hopeful QB kind of deflation in value and just end up like taking 4 or 5 in the top 10 rounds with the hope that I could basically just capitalize off of other folks not really wanting to go after QBs. But as you can see on the board itself, I want to say there's probably close to top 22, 23 quarterbacks are probably done by round 5. So it was pretty tough for me to attack where I wanted to attack there. And that really does just come down to wanting to take over, a small margin of the QB space and be able to just kind of capitalize on that value. Now, to Billy's point, I do think that there are plenty of edges, specifically with regards to both elite tight end, which to me really is just Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. So if you see at the 208, I traded up from the 212. Did I do that right? Yeah, the 208, traded up from the 212 to get there. And I basically just gave up a future second to move up 4 spots. The idea there is just really wanting to go after the elite tight ends and knowing that Trey McBride was basically like my pretty big cutoff. That was the intent. But the downside was that I really wanted to be able to get one elite wide receiver by making that trade. So part of my own negotiation, I guess, faux pas was that I sent the 212 instead of the 301. And in reality, if I would have been able to go grab McBride and Nico Collins or McBride and Brian Thomas, one of those two, that was kind of going to be like my dream circumstance of my first 3 picks, and basically botched it and didn't want to go into McConkey or Garrett Wilson. So it put me into a different situation. But I do think that moving into quarterbacks that have that capability of basically being a relatively high accuracy quarterback with lower sack to, I guess, downs played percentage, put me in a situation where I was willing to go out and go after Drake May. I do think that he has pretty elite upside. We just need to see a better team put around him, I think, before we'll ever probably see that. So that was kind of my own intent or thought process through the first 3 rounds. What about you guys?
Sure. Just to jump back in real quick, I think that pivot was actually pretty solid there. I think that's probably the right way to go based on the next few picks. Totally understand wanting the players that you were discussing there, but I think Drake May is a good consolation prize. In general, though, some like that trade is not what I'm talking about here in terms of jumping up from the 208 or the 212 to the 208, jumping up to the 208. I think that's actually the kind of trade that I do like to make, where I know what I'm getting and it's a limited window. But like, I think potentially some of the trades because there was a lot of trades made pre-draft in general. Mm-hmm. And I think that is obviously a gamble because you don't know how the board's going to fall. And so I do think some of that could have led to some, maybe some uneasiness from some people and some questionable decision-making throughout the draft, just based on, being in a spot with a pick that you kind of feel maybe forced to have now. Not everybody was trading into certain picks at certain spots. There was quite a bit of trading, but I just think that is a dicey move. And so that's something I avoid, or I try to avoid if I can, unless I'm getting like a really, really good deal here. One other note from the first 3 rounds, like in this kind of opposite of what I'm saying, who was it? The big Wachowski, I think. Mm-hmm. He had a great first couple of rounds. I thought that he did a good job maneuvering. He jumped up. Jake, he actually traded with Jake, jumped up and got Josh Allen over Lamar. And then this is a good comment from Gordo because it's right in line with what we're talking about here. Didn't think Bowers would fall. I was actually hoping he fell to me at 12. I would have probably snagged him there. But the person I'm talking about right now who traded up, got Josh Allen, was also able to trade up into the first
Bowers
again and get Brock Bowers at 110. And also he got the 2.03 and got Bijan Robinson. I mean, those 3 picks in a row like are absolute just, I mean, nails. Like, you know, I think he killed those trades, and those are really quality picks for this kind of league. So I think he crushed the first couple rounds there for me.
Well,
But,
let's actually talk about that. No, because you brought up the trade, so let's just talk about the trade as it is, right? So, the Big Wachowski, he traded up to get into the 110, the 203, the 410, the 510 for the 302, the 306, the 706, the 906, a 26 first and second, a 27 first and second. So we got Bowers, Bijan, Baker, and Bucky for Sam Laporta, Purdy, and basically 4 firsts and 2 seconds. So when you put out the value, it does look pretty good, I think, on both sides, like from just like a complete valuation perspective.
Sure.
Then when you think about the actual point scoring involved, like between Bowers, Bijan, Baker, and Bucky, like that's going to make a pretty big impact on your team. Now, I will say that I think that those moves, unfortunately, at certain points within the draft kind of get counteracted based off of some of the other things that owner did throughout the rest, or manager did throughout the rest of the draft. But I think from the actual, the person trading away those picks in this situation with CF Gordo, who's in the comments, shout out. I do think that, you know, basically going full nuke and doing productive struggle year one is a great pivot because of just kind of the way in which he was able to accumulate picks moving forward. So like, it's really important to be able to like balance act that whole charade. And to Gordo's point, you know, not knowing that Bowers is going to fall that far is one of the main caveats to not wanting, especially for me, like when I was at the 101, I didn't want to fall too far back or give up that draft capital until I was closer to being on the clock. So like moving back from the 101 to like the 106 just didn't seem appealing to me, which was the original offers that I was getting from the Big Wachowski, which I think Uriah actually ended up making a maneuver with. And, you know, I think that is kind of the fear, is that you could fall out. Now, being stuck with Mahomes at the 106 is a pretty solid, you know, circumstance, being there with Mahomes or Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Bowers. Like, that's a good selection process to be in, and I'm okay being there. The 110, you probably don't have that same circumstance, and that's somewhere that you would be concerned with having to take a CJ Stroud or a Caleb Williams or even Malik Neighbors. Like, I totally get that line of logic, but at the same time, it does help to be maybe a little bit more patient, knowing that that deal is probably going to be there when you're on the clock anyway. So I guess that's kind of my feedback to what I think is a pretty good trade for both parties, but also just something that you can maybe take advantage of and just get out of your second round pick if you really wanted to, you know, have that elite tight end. Because like I was saying before, I really do think that Bowers and McBride in this particular league format are going to have the most explosive and almost destructive capabilities to opposing teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think honestly, and I know this sounds like a homer kind of take, I guess, in a way, because I drafted Kittle, but I think he kind of qualifies in this type of league because he just the way that he scores and the way that, you know, he accumulates points is going to be pretty great for this league. And if you looked at the scoring for last year, he was elite, I guess we'll call it. But 2 quick points. Gordo, I think you're correct, and I think what he did was something we talk about is like kind of, or, you know, zig when everybody's zagging, and it's like, I don't think many people chose a productive struggle type route, and he leaned super hard into it and kind of cornered the market on it. So I don't think what he did was a bad move in any way. I think you're right. It's like they both got something out of it, and it's a pretty fair trade. But Big Wachowski gets a good boost from having these high war players who also are young and have great value, right? And so, like, yes, he may have made some maybe more questionable moves down the road, or you know, whatever it was, gave up value here and there, but it's like at the top of the draft, he kind of bought himself a little bit of room to breathe, I think, in that respect. And you know, that's what those kind of moves can do for you. But I think what he did, which I think, because those trades were made during the first round of the draft, like in the middle of it, or at least the second one was, where he got the 2 picks at 110 and 2-3. And again, he did it in a window where the range of outcomes was pretty limited. Like, he knew what he was going to be there for the most part. The target was going to be, hopefully Bowers falls here, and then, I can accumulate this kind of value. He kind of foresaw. And I think that is something that, it's more anecdotal, but I notice when I'm drafting that it's a lot more fruitful, or at least I feel a lot more successful when I'm making trades, doing it in more limited space, like trading 2 rounds back or whatever. We've talked about this a little bit, but anyway. Okay, we hung up on that for a minute. Where do we want to go from here?
I think maybe point 2. So just talking a little bit about how running backs were weighted with this point structure, and kind of the balancing act of age versus, declining in value, but having relatively high scoring output. And then also, as you can see on the board in the first 10 rounds, a plethora of 2025 rookie picks coming about. And I think that has a lot to do with, a pretty I was going to say well endowed, a well supplemented.
Are they now?
Potentially, I guess, depends on who you speak with. I don't know them like that, but it depends on, how well supplied you perceive the current running back class, rookie class. And I do think that had a lot of bearing impact on the actual draft itself. So I think that's kind of the open question I have to the group. You're right. You have any thoughts there?
No, I mean, just kind of what you would expect out of a startup, right? Everybody wants young talent first, and it's nothing I see there is like really shocking. Like, it just kind of what you would expect from a startup, right? There's some guys like questionable, like, okay, as a new rookie running back going to come in, this class does look to be a lot better than we've had in a while. So some of these fringe guys could easily end up being RB2 on their teams, even the currently RB1s. It's not really shocking. It's just kind of what you would expect, or what I think I would expect. I don't see anything too crazy about it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of looking at the rookie picks, it's like 101, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then Bucky, James Cook, and then I went Jacobs because I just think the role is going to be there still. And in this format, he's, a really high value player. And then it goes 107, Chase Brown, 108, 109, 110, Christian McCaffrey. Like to your eyes point, I do think it's kind of what you would expect. Like, this does seem very similar to last year, where we saw, Joe Mixon and Kamara maybe fall one round later than they went here. Like, it was round 9 or 10 maybe. And Derrick Henry is in round 8 here. So those things aren't super shocking to me. I think that, again, it goes back to people not adjusting to the values, or the scoring settings rather, because I think that, even a Barkley, a JT, those guys would have gone potentially a little bit earlier, if those things were considered, maybe, not much, but a little bit earlier potentially.
Can we call that out for a second?
In lieu of maybe quarterbacks is what I would say, just kind of looking at the board. But I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Jake?
I was just going to say, I think that's one of the most interesting parts about this startup was specifically looking at the scoring structure of the league and then seeing Saquon Barkley, who I think is, I don't know what everyone was using while they were drafting, but in terms of ADP, the dude's sitting at 25, right? You're talking about the 301, and depending on the brackets or parameters you're using, I was using the last 14 days, and he was sitting at 23, which is the 211, right? He didn't go until the 410 in this league, which he's going in at the 211 in probably most normal leagues where there is no point per first down. You're talking about maybe it's a 2-start running back league, I would say is probably your standard dynasty format, with maybe 3-start wide receiver and then a couple of flex. That's kind of where I was a little surprised. And then you also started to see guys like Kyron go ahead of Breece Hall. those types of like small moves just felt off to me in certain windows. But I agree. I do think that there wasn't enough adaptation to running back scoring. And it was something that I thought I was going to be able to take more advantage of where I was, just given kind of the turn that I would be able to get. And the reality is that when what was that, at the 4-12 and 5-1, I honestly thought I was going to be able to fall on Saquon and Jonathan Taylor. And once I didn't get either of them, and as you guys can see, there isn't a running back that goes for another 10 picks. So I don't think I was necessarily off in terms of my value. It was just like, I wasn't willing to then, go into a James Cook or a Bucky, what I thought was almost a round off of where I valued them. So it kind of gets stuck in those circumstances to, and to your point, Billy, with regards to the early trading, I got that 102 or the 101 trade to the 102 trade. I think it was like the day before the draft actually started. And so what ended up happening was there was like a bunch of pick flips in like the 6th and maybe the 9th and 10th round or something like that, or 8th and 10th round. I don't remember exactly. And I do think that those were potential windows where maybe the value would have been more to kind of hold and wait, because I do think that the running back value sat a little bit better at those turns in those later rounds than they did in the earlier turns. So I think that's kind of like the reality of startups as a whole, is that you can, a lot of people mock, they prep, but the live version of it always seems to surprise people. You never are able to, know whether or not CJ Stroud is going to go at the 107 and Brock Bowers dropping all the way to the 110 to Gordo's point, in a 1.75 tight end premium, a 0.75 tight end premium, you'd expect him to be probably at the 106 or 107 mark. Like, that is just the reality. He's getting valued more than certain wide receivers, depending on the league setup. So being able to adapt to that, I think, is really important. And with that being said, I do think that the general running back value is going to be even more interesting post the rookie draft. We had a lot of individuals within the draft end up drafting a ton of 3rd and 4th round picks, which is where I do think that a pretty decent chunk of running backs will end up going, just like any other rookie draft. It'll be really, really intriguing to see how they end up developing in the NFL and how that's actually going to impact the actual market within the league itself. Because if someone ends up housing, 7 or 8 rookies, rookie running backs specifically, and 6 of them become starters, you're in a pretty good situation, right? Like, that is very much a potential reality, just given kind of the aging impacts in which is currently happening in the NFL. So just something to be mindful of. But I think we're at a pretty good point to kind of dive in. Were there any oddball picks that you guys saw that you wanted to kind of point out and just kind of like, oh, that's a weird one. What was that guy thinking? Those types of things.
I mean, I was surprised. Just a couple comments, I guess. I was surprised Amon-Ra fell to where he did. Such a high value asset. So, and the war in this league with the points per first down and all that, like, for him, it really suits him as a player. So the youth and everything, I was just very surprised to see him fall. I'm sure people were surprised to see CeeDee Lamb fall, probably past me at the 2-1. My intent was to go kind of hero running back, and it kind of, with how, again, the running backs are kind of falling, and with the change in scoring, I think I adjusted a little bit there, which I felt good about personally. But getting back to the question here, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. I was interested in the Tyreek Hill pick at 6'7". I think I mentioned this to you on the side, and it kind of passed, and we didn't really talk about it. But I think I'd take maybe even like the rookie picks I went after him, Zay Flowers, maybe even. Not that Tyreek Hill can't bounce back, just the age and also the risk that he doesn't is just a little concerning. So, I mean, if you want to just talk through that a little bit,
sure.
I'm sure there's some other ones we can point out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole purpose of this episode, is for us to talk through the startup in all formats. Yeah, I think if you look at what falls after Tyreek in terms of quote unquote value, I do think that I missed out on value But I do think that from a scoring perspective, I think I got the best asset available left in the draft. I do think that Tyreek got deeply impacted by Tua not being there for as long as he was last season. He ended up having a relatively productive year without really any touchdowns. And I think that's kind of where my head just kind of stuck with. I checked out general tape of what he was doing. It didn't look like he was, not open. He had Tyler Huntley and some quarterback who I don't even remember who it was at quarterback. Jalen Waddle didn't have a particularly healthy or good year either. And I just see that offense particularly bouncing back if they kind of keep all their pieces. And it actually goes into one of the deep sleepers that I think that's available in the draft as well, at Malik Washington at the 17.7, just to bring him up really quickly. I do think that if Tyreek doesn't stay in Miami, that's probably a really good asset to be acquiring. And he has a ton of additional value. So to go back to your question, it really is kind of embedded in this idea of, I do think that there's going to be a window where Tyreek is going to gain value, whether it's by performance or by a move. I think the idea that being attached to Miami isn't necessarily the most appealing for a lot of people because they are fearful of Tua's continued injury history. But the reality is that the picks themselves truly are more valuable if I traded out the pick for something else. But here's the thing, is that I always have this issue. When I draft a startup, I can't typically trade the pick. Like, the pick is already almost set in its value because of the startup itself. So like, unless I truly wait till being on the clock, I have a very difficult time maneuvering out of that pick itself. I believe it's at the 107, if I remember correctly, is where Butker is. So it was either the 107 or Tyreek.
Yep.
Right now, I don't really have the 107 as being a spot I want to even be in the rookie drafts, to be completely honest with you. So
That's fair.
I guess to your point, it's like, who else comes in and around that area? We got Zay Flowers, who I'm not particularly high on, and Chase Brown. I personally am going to go Tyreek over both of them every single time. And so that's just kind of where my head was at. But to your point, I completely agree with you. I think from a value perspective, I missed out on the opportunity. I just needed to be more creative in terms of like how I were to kind of restructure or remove that asset from my team and put it somewhere else. But yeah.
That's fair. No, I appreciate the breakdown there. And I'll just have two other comments just on the draft, and Uriah, feel free to jump in, and comment on my comments or have other comments, whatever you want. One is, generally, I wonder if people are going to be disappointed with some of the quarterbacks they picked in like the 4th, 5th round, instead of letting them fall in this format. Because what's going to happen is, I think, it's still super flex. Still very important to have at least one quarterback that's, high-end quarterback. Still important if you can have, 2 or 3 of those, then you have a pretty significant advantage in this kind of league. But the QB scoring is going to flatten out pretty significantly past the top like 15 guys. And so it's going to, they're just going to be like, I feel like they're going to be scoring much more like a 7th or 8th round pick than a 4th or 5th round pick. So just that's a general comment on the QB selections there. And I picked, honestly, 2 of them, and I should say maybe the later 4th and the 5th. Like I'm talking about like the Bryce Young, Tua's, like Penix, like all those guys, even Dak maybe in this format. Kyler maybe. I mean, he still offers some value there probably. Jordan Love is still pretty good value, but some of these guys I would probably still let fall in this format. But Baker Mayfield was absolutely dynamic in this format, and Jared Goff is really going to be solid in this format too. So I think those were solid picks at the beginning of the 1st round for the 4th round for the quarterbacks. The other comment I wanted to make was on the tight ends. We haven't really talked too much about that other than at the top, but I think Miami Jeff did a really good job of kind of waiting on these guys and going Jonnu, Kincaid, Ferguson. Like I'm not a Kincaid guy, but I think the idea, with the 7.5 premium, if you're not going to get one of those top few guys, go ahead and he missed out on, obviously, Bowers. He wasn't going to get him because of where he was in the 1st round. McBride, you traded up and jumped him. And then Sam Laporta, after, he's going to A-Chain, which I think is fine over Laporta, and then he misses on that. And it's like, okay, after that, you just wait. I think it was kind of a good job in this kind of league, stacking up 3, guys like that. I think that was smart. And then 1 point, Evan Ingram, who I think could be really, really good in this kind of format. He wasn't last year if you look at numbers, because he didn't play as much and it was just a terrible situation all around. But he goes in the 10th round here. Yeah, 10.05. And I could see a total bounce back this year with this entire team, but he's been good in a mediocre situation already. And if he's healthy, I think in this scoring format, he could be a serious value there. So I thought that was a really good pick as well.
The only thing I would say to that, and one of the reasons why I ended up waiting, because I was between Ingram and David Montgomery at the 9-1, actually. So I've been reading about how Ingram is actually a potential cut risk because of the way that his contract is structured. And I do fear that Ingram, in basically like 90% of the offenses in the NFL, I don't know how productive he would be. Like, he needs to be in a very specialized place to basically fade off of his inability to properly block. And so I think that's kind of where my head was at in terms of like watching his value fall, but I don't know if that's necessarily where others was at particularly. Like, I think to your point, it had a lot to do with just kind of the fading of what happened in 2024 more than anything else. Because if you look at the other tight ends that are around him, like, I'm not hating on Cade Otton, but I do think that Evan Ingram in this format is superior.
Yeah, around at least superior probably. And I had made some trades in this area. I forego the Evan Ingram pick. I traded back actually, just because I thought that number one, I thought that he was going to fall potentially to my next pick that I traded back to. So that was which was like what 4 picks past where he actually went. So it was definitely possible. But also I figured, if I didn't, there was a asset of similar value there. So it just kind of, I was okay with that. And what it was also, and I'm thinking back now and looking at what I picked, based on how I kind of picked some aging out players earlier on, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going another aging asset, like 30-plus-year-old tight end who may not, give the return, and also get some younger assets. I ended up going a pick. I think 205 maybe is what I ended up getting there. And that was a calculation I remember making. I was like, I don't think many people are going to take these picks here. And the 204 went before. And that was the only one that went. So that was the calculation that was made there. Yeah.
Nice. You're right. Any that stick out to you?
No, I think you guys handled it pretty good. I mean, I was kind of surprised Caleb Williams went in the first.
That's
also
a good shout.
The 101 going as soon as it did. Sorry, Josh. Other than that,
first 2 picks.
I think everybody picked their tight ends at pretty good spots. I end up with another Kyle Pitts share because everybody's off him and he's never been cheaper. So we'll see what happens there with Mr. Penix. And then the only thing about Evan Ingram is the press conference, which I think actually came after the draft. So that's fair. But the offensive coordinator there, GM, they're talking highly about getting, was it?
Brenton Strange.
Yes,
exactly. So that's not really good. Yeah, they're talking about having big plans for Brenton Strange moving forward. No mention of Ingram, so there's that. So, but
I didn't catch that.
I think this draft actually took place before that press conference.
Okay.
So anyway, shout out. It was a really fun draft. Everybody drafted at a really good pace. Wasn't too fast, wasn't too slow. It was just a really good goal, and it was fun. It was something nice to have after the Super Bowl. So
there were a lot of trades, a lot of people interacting, and when people were taking a while, for the most part, it was because they were actually negotiating trades more often than not. Like, it was just a very engaged group. The only other pick that I did want to shout out was the Chris Olave over Hawkinson in this format. Just felt really weird to me. It ended up only going 2 picks, and I know it's not necessarily a topic that we had here, but I did want to shout out Poetry and Lotion's draft. I think it's actually the most unique draft in the league, going really only 1 quarterback up high. To Billy's point, being able to use other assets to basically take over QB2 is going to be kind of a pretty valuable strategy, but also then going so heavy on high-end wide receivers. which was one of the major reasons why no wide receivers really fell to me on the other end. I do think that he ended up starting, if you look at some of the rounds, some pretty big moves in wide receiver every single time. So like one of the most impactful things you can do when you're drafting in a startup is basically starting trends. And I felt like every time that Poetry and Lotion needed to start a trend, he did. And more often than not, if you look at the way that the roster is actually constructed, he ends up getting a ton of really awesome running back value actually later on down the draft. So getting a Travis Etienne, a Stevenson, a Pollard, and then even Jonathan Brooks, you can be off of him all you want, but like at the end of the day, that's really, really solid value for basically, a late first round pick last year, plus all of those high end rookie picks that are going to be potentially even more valuable as we get closer to the rookie draft. That draft, funny enough, because I think it's a confusing one for a lot of people when they see it, it is just really, really heady. It puts his team in a super competitive position, but it also puts his team in a place where if he wants to go directly into productive struggle, if he wants to, like he's in a spot that he can do that too. Like I think that those running back assets are probably very easy to get off of, especially in this league format, if they score properly. And additionally, those rookie picks were also probably really easy to get off of. So just wanted to shout that out. Thought that the Olave Hawkinson move was weird, but it also kind of transitioned into a way to show how Poetry and Lotion was able to get into Hawkinson early enough, get that really high end tight end value, and then really kind of shift the draft a lot after that. The last thing I did want to bring up was just kind of some deep sleepers later down the draft. Were there any players outside of, I brought up Malik Washington, are there any other players that stuck out to the two of you?
For me, one was just Tyler Higbee. I think I got him in like a 20-something, whatever round. Kind of nobody cares about him because he didn't play at all last year, regular season, because he got injured the year before. But the one game he came back for in the divisional round, he caught like 7 balls on 10 targets and a touchdown.
And got injured again.
Not like an ACL though, right?
No. It was a small injury. It was a small. He's fine. I was just making a joke.
I just thought it was kind of like, holy shit! Like starting tight end. Like I've shit on Tyler Higbee. Billy and I have shit on Higbee for years now, but now he's finally a value. So I was actually kind of surprised he was still there when I got him. But that's it.
Yeah, I thought. Brenton Strange at 18th round pick. He's former second round pick. He had, some success when Ingram was out. The signs are all there. So I don't know how we all let that happen necessarily. I think that was a really solid pick in the late rounds. I think another one that I was actually looking to snag myself at some point, I thought he was going to fall a little bit further, was Wan'Dale Robinson. Now I know that's like, it doesn't sound sexy, but in this format where it's point per first down, and receivers get a point per reception compared to running backs getting 0.5, he actually, I think, carries some decent value. Say they get a Matthew Stafford in there, and it's Malik Neighbors and Wan'Dale and, some guys they draft. It's like, I think he might be actually pretty solid. And he had actually, I think, maybe close to or a positive WAR in this format, which is pretty crazy for a wide receiver of his, caliber, as we usually think of him. So that was one that I was kind of targeting later and went a little bit earlier, but still 17th round is pretty solid in my opinion. I was happy to get Hollywood Brown in the end of the 17th round. I know that's not a crazy, valuable pick for the most part, and maybe not in this format, but at that late, I figure if he falls into a decent situation, like he'll have some value. I could probably, get some return on that investment if it's just draft capital, at the very least. So, and those are a couple.
Nice. I think the only ones I wanted to add, I really liked the Rachaad White pick.
I think
Rachaad in, what is that, the 16th? The 16-7. Like, just knowing kind of the direction in which the NFL is going, I think receiving backs are going to have a lot of longevity in general. Whatever we think of Rachaad White as a true running back is another conversation. And, in that same vein, Austin Eckler around later. You also have where I just lost him. Who was it? Anyway,
Blake Corum's not bad there at 16th, but
yeah, no, I didn't want to shout out my own pick because I thought it was fine.
that was your own pick, yeah.
Antonio Gibson all the way down there in the 23rd or 22nd round.
Yeah,
like
good pick. Yeah.
I don't necessarily love these players as like, a prospect profile or like me enjoying the player and how they play. I just think that from a point scoring perspective, I think that these players have value in this format specifically. And I think they also have playability in the NFL. Like they're going to continue to be used in the NFL regardless if we like them or not, and they have all of the skills to be basically consistently used. The only other player I thought were really interesting were Andre Yoshivas in the 21st round, basically back to back with Dontavian Wicks. I think both of them are in very unique situations, basically the same situations that happened last offseason where, we don't know what their usage will be like this upcoming season. But if they get into a lucky enough circumstance, whoever's acquiring both those pieces could be in a really, really good situation in terms of potentially having a wide receiver 2 in a top 5 to 10 offense in the NFL. So I think that has a lot of positivity to it. And in the same vein, there was one other player. AJ Barner in Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
I personally don't love AJ Barner, but I do think that Seattle situation is really, really solid. So I just wanted to shout out Uriah there. I thought that was a really good pick and a really good spot to be in because you could very well have tight end 1 in Seattle moving forward. So yeah, I think those were the deep sleepers that I liked. I think there's going to probably be a bunch of those running backs that we didn't call out turn into probably deep sleepers like it always is. But
Will
that's
Shipley
the way
in
to
the
do
23rd or 20. Yeah, Will Shipley, like those kind of guys. I think there's some. Yeah, the Yoshivas one's a good one. He was going to get picked by me. The next pick, I ended up going 4, 8, 9, and 10. I had 3 picks there. Instead, Dontavian Wicks was mine. I agree. In the 20th round, it's like he was going like near 5, 6, 7 rounds earlier in a previous draft, last year. So I like that. I actually doubled up with, Romeo Doubs is. I'm shouting out some of my players here, but Romeo Doubs, I think in the 17th round I think that's a really good value, to be honest with you. 17th round Romeo Doubs, or almost 18th round is kind of crazy. But I did pick Tank Bigsby. I think that he is a very good pick because he's the 16th round, could be 1A 1B running back in the offense we were just shouting out for the Jags. And I don't necessarily believe that, but that's definitely the narrative that's out there. And I ended up being able to trade him for basically swapping picks and getting a third on top. And so he carries value is my point. Last thing I'll mention, we can move on to the prospect profiles, but I think that one thing that really impacts things in these early drafts is the ADP is all jacked up. And that's why a guy like Tank Bigsby is hanging around so late, or guys like that hang around so late, is because they're not in the flow order of the ADP. And we've talked about this a lot. Have your own source of ADP, have your own rankings, and you will absolutely crush early drafts like this. There was so much value that I was able to find by doing that, by saying, here's my value, here's ADP. Let's look at this draft. Whoa, there's a guy that's two rounds higher in ADP. At the very least, that's a value gain for you in terms of market value. So it's like those things are, there's a lot of advantage to kind of approaching these drafts early on and knowing about the ADP, looking really deep in those lists, going and finding these guys and saying, I'm going to take advantage of this. So that was one thing I wanted to note about, drafting on Sleeper or MFL this early. There's going to be those wacky ADP things, but this was really good. I'm really glad we were able to do this. Last thing, I did want to mention one other thing. I pulled up Dynasty Daddy. This is just a more macro look, but in general, this league has a lot of contender. It goes back to what I was saying before. A lot of contender type teams, very few rebuilding. There's not even one in here that is called a rebuilder per their ranking or tiering system. There's a couple of frauds, and those are pretty much the rebuilders. But CF Gordo, the one we were talking about, he has the number 1 overall rank in the league with a number 1 draft rank and a number 1 tight end rank. But he's a fraud because he's leaned into the following year, but you can see how valuable his team is. And so it was just interesting looking at this. We're going to have a lot of a lot of teams battling for, playoff spots this year. And I think we're going to have quite a few teams maybe turn the other direction really fast early on, just because there may be some teams that are out of reach, in the top 4 or so. And that might declare early on. But I thought it was interesting looking at this. I think a lot of really, really good drafts, a couple questionable maybe drafts, but for the most part, man, this was a really, really fun draft with a really great group of people. So appreciate everybody involved, and good breakdown, guys.
Good stuff.
All right, we'll head into some prospect profiles. I'll take a quick break, but I'll let you guys get started. Tet McMillan from Arizona.
Fraud this. Yeah. Let me pull up my.
I'll get started then if you want.
Yeah, I was about to say, Jake, go ahead and hop in. Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, no such thing as a technical difficulty on this podcast. So I watched 3 games of Tet. Most recently, I think I've watched about like 8 actually from him, but most of my notes are from the 3 games that I had watched. It was New Mexico, the Oklahoma Bowl game actually from 2023, and Kansas State this year as well. One of the things that I really love about Tet is I think he fits the like prototype of the like foundational new wide receiver. He's like tall, lanky, athletic, and what people are probably like foresee an elite wide receiver look like in modern day NFL without really possessing much eliteness from what I've kind of seen from his game. I will say that he has really strong ability to create after the catch, which is awesome. I just don't know if his body type is going to be as effective as it should be in the NFL. And that's one of my concerns there. I do like his general speed and his curvilinear movement with the ball. I don't actually see it that much in his actual route running, which is pretty weird, but something that I did notice. And then his lack of aggression / like ball hawking capabilities. Like I don't find that he is aggressive enough when the ball is actually in the air, but his hands are exceptional. It's kind of a similar criticism that I think a lot of people had, but specifically Matt Wellman had with regards to Marvin Harrison Jr. I have that same concern with Tet, where there's like moments where I need more aggression from an elite wide receiver that I just don't get. I think he exhibits really good physicality and possession. He bounces really well off bodies, maintains weight comfortably in his lower body with just really, really fantastic contact balance. I do love his extension. I think that's like one of his best aspects to his actual receiving game. So you'll see that basically he's able to expand windows more naturally than a lot of other wide receivers can, which helps specifically because he didn't have one of the best quarterbacks in college football, which I actually learned today of all places. It's really sad that him and Noah Fafita ended up actually playing together in high school and in college. I had no idea, which was
I've
pretty
definitely
crazy.
mentioned that on here before. I've definitely
wasn't
mentioned
listening
that.
to
I said it's amazing that he's that terrible playing.
That's the thing.
Alongside such a good player for so long.
But that's the thing though. Like if you watch his 2023 tape, Noah Fafita, like he is able to take advantage of defenses specifically because he was able to basically use
great chemistry.
Both Jacob Cowing and Tet. He didn't have the second piece this year. So he was just so inundated with this idea that he had to go to wide receiver 1, which is why when you actually watch the tape for Tet, like there's so many forced throws to him that make his tape probably look a little bit worse than they need to be. But
yeah,
I think that's one of my biggest issues with Fafita is that like, and it shows his lack of intelligence, honestly, more than anything else, is that his inability to adapt to the game post Jacob Cowing leaving was pretty jarring. The last thing I did want to say, outside of all those positives, one last positive is that I did find that he actually exposes and attracts a lot of downfield contact, which I thought was really interesting because I think that has a lot to just do with his general frame. A lot of uncalled DPIs in college football in general is just something that I've noticed. I think they let the players play a lot more, but I would expect probably a lot more DPIs in the NFL in those same circumstances, which is not necessarily a skill, but I think it's a positive aspect to his game that doesn't necessarily turn into points or stats, but something that I did notice. What about you, Billy? What did you see?
Yeah, no, really, really good stuff there. Yeah, I think this is a size and speed freak. Like triangle numbers just everything, the size, speed, strength, it's all there. Displays great, a great foundation, but could use some refinement, I think. From a route running perspective, there's some really good stuff there, but there's, some stuff to work on. I'll get into a little bit of that, but above average athleticism overall. Doesn't necessarily possess an extra, gear before or after the catch. That said, that's outstanding ability to evade and create yards after the catch, especially for his size. Good route technique, versatile route tree, but lacks elite type nuance detail through the stem of the route. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. Despite a quality skill set overall. Exhibits shoulder fakes, selling body leans, like some good manipulation movement, exceptional awareness overall. You can tell that it may have been some of a connection with Fafita, but he does seem to see the field like a QB. He's good job of stopping, following the QB, reading coverages, sitting in zones, all those kind of things. Near, if not elite ball skills. I do think it's an interesting point you made that he doesn't maybe attack the ball as much as you'd like. I think that's what you were saying. And overall, I think, would like to see better aggressiveness and strength as a blocker, given his size and frame. So, maybe a little ding there, but I think in general, from a route technique perspective, really good separation and stem nuance. He uses his large frame to lean into receivers and create separation mid route with that. Often beats press with quick release and physicality. And so I think you're right. This is the kind of new age type of receiver, a guy of his size. You're like, he shouldn't move like this, but he does. And he's really agile and really, able to, use his feet well, good hand fighting, all that good stuff. I do think you'd like to see more refined footwork. But overall, I think it's pretty good. The ball tracking, all that was there for me. I didn't have much issue with it. I think the extension in traffic without fear is super impressive. Like, he just goes up there and gets it. Does not matter. He has an uncanny ability to contort his body, track and secure the ball. Just all around rock solid from that perspective, in my opinion. I think he displays great bend for his size, great speed and quickness, unique for his size, more elusive than expected. I think he lacks that elite burst, that extra gear. But overall, just, there's not much to dislike about Tet. You just want to see maybe a little bit more refinement to take him to that kind of elite type level. And honestly, when you hear anybody talk about him, that's kind of it. They're like, he's great, but he's not he's not top 10 pick worthy or whatever. It's like, he's a Drake London, a bargain brand Drake London maybe kind of thing. It's like, that's kind of the narrative is what you get, I think, out of a lot of analysts. But I think overall this is a really good player. He's going to end up being number 1, 2 in the class, dependent probably on Travis Hunter, and maybe some other factors. But for the most part, I think he exhibits everything you want to see out of a guy. So you're right. What are your thoughts, film and data?
Well,
or just data,
film,
whatever you got.
I just did. No, he looks the part. That's my bullet point. He definitely looks the part.
Yeah,
but we'll hop into some data. This all kind of matches up with what you guys are seeing on film. Analytically, he looks great. His yards after the catch is only 5.1, but again, I guess that's probably his low slot percentage if he's lining out wide. Typically, when he's going to be catching the ball downfield with his almost 14-yard ADOT, he's going to have a DB right close to him, right? So unless the DB is absolute trash, it's an easy tackle. Right? So you're not going to see a lot of yards after the catch with this usage. His yards per team pass attempt is 3. His yards per route run, 2.87. His zone yards per route run, 2.75. His man yards per route run is 3.4 with an average dominator of 31.2. Those are all excellent marks. Like,
outstanding.
This is
outstanding.
Yeah, these are things that you see from almost can't miss type prospect. Breakout age 19, early declare, only played 3 years of college, contested catch rate 61.3. So when he does have a DB on him with this almost 14-yard ADOT, he's catching the ball. I mean, I don't have to see it on film. I can tell like he's winning those battles often. So keep it short. Everything analytically is just it's really, really good. Tet McMillan, I think, is as close to can't miss wide receiver in this draft that I've seen so far.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man. 11.98% first down per route run is exceptional as well.
Yes.
I mean, just every mark is pretty much dominant for this player. And yeah, I think
I'd like
on
to
a
see him in
per
the
catch,
slot in the NFL more often. See what that really turns into.
Yeah, and I do think from like that Drake London comp, I think that works in terms of like scheming for him. It should be similar, right? Where he is playing in the slot, maybe more like a 30% range, maybe, you know, that kind of thing. And able to do some more versatile things because he's really good. It doesn't need to be downfield. It could be over the middle. It can be he's fearless, like I said. So this guy can run, you know, full route tree, everything. So I think they can really move him around the field and do some interesting things with him. You know, obviously landing spot's always going to be important for these, but yeah, early declare, like this guy's just a monster, man. I think, you know, the what I was going to say is the yards after catch per reception, like a lot of receptions, a lot of downfield receptions, like it's going to be lower. Like you basically, you know, kind of highlighted the reasons for it at the beginning, and I think it's you know, important to do that because these
like
are some of the lower
coverage.
marks. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
He's got a guy right there, right?
I guess what my point is you're correct, and on more than average, that is the case, but he exhibits what I wanted to get to was he exhibits really good after the catch ability regardless. And that doesn't necessarily show up in the yards after the catch per reception numbers, but the dude is elusive for his size. He has good balance and he's going to maybe not take it to the house every time or anything like that, but he might create, you know, 5 to 15 more yards on majority of, you know, catches over the middle or something like that aren't just downfield sideline catches and stuff like that. So just a very impressive player, very good player. And I don't think there's going to be much question of having him at the 102, 103 range, maybe, you know, that area, depending on a couple outside factors. So yeah, good stuff there. We can move on to Trey Harris.
Yes. Sweet. I watched the LSU game and the Kentucky game. The LSU game, probably some of the most nauseating experiences you can go through. I don't know if anyone remembers that game, but basically Trey earlier on had like a 75-yard bomb that he could have easily scored and just dropped it in open field. It was
was this the LSU game you said? Yeah, I watched this one. Yeah. No, and honestly, like, let me see something real quick on that point. Like, I didn't think he had bad hands, and that was one of the first thing I watched, and I was like, this is not going to be good, is it? And it ended up being better than that. But yes, that was excruciating. I agree.
Yes,
but go ahead. Sorry.
It was excruciating, and to your point, you know, it's also one of those really unfortunate things because if this is like the first sequence you see on a player, you're already inherently like adding bias to the rest of this process, and I needed to remove that.
Yep.
Like when I watched that play, I actually turned off the LSU game, put on the Kentucky game where he actually he just had a significantly better game, and then put the LSU game back on. But yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that I have with Trey, especially in 2024, is that his route tree was just still really, really limited. Like the dude basically ran 3 relatively vertical routes and occasionally was lined up in the slot. Very, very rare. General footwork is just lacking, which ended up providing his inability to basically beat the press. I like specifically for dudes that are as big as he are, like I really want to make sure that they have both the physical aspects, like upper strength, but also like the footwork to get out of the press. I didn't find that he was particularly good at either, just from those 2 games, but maybe Billy will have some different feedback there. I did find that his overhead and deep ball tracking also needed improvement. That obviously came from that big drop, but he also had another drop in the Kentucky game where it just felt like he just wasn't tracking the ball appropriately between hands, eyes, etc. I also found that his tracking was significantly better with flat line throws instead of arched throws. Super stiff runner. Like I just found him to not be very malleable in the actual running phase, whether that was with the ball in hand or within a route. I found that to be incredibly visible with regards to just general elusiveness while running like after contact or after reception. He does read space really well, and I found that to be both while in possession of the ball, but also within route running. So one of the things that I have noticed specifically with Ole Miss was that there's just a lot of broken plays, which meant that Trey unfortunately had to kind of expand on individual routes a little bit more. I don't know if that was necessarily just down to Jackson Dart, but it did feel a little obvious that it was happening relatively frequently with this Ole Miss team. Last thing I did want to say is that I do like Trey, but I do think that his landing spot is super, super important. Like, I just find that wide receivers like Trey are going to be really dependent on where they land. I do need to see him expand a little bit on his route tree for him to have, longer term success in the NFL. But like, he's the type of guy, and I'm not going to say this like as like a 1-to-1. This isn't a player comp, but like how I felt about Jalen Hyatt going into the Giants, like I needed a receiver that was more limited with regards to the routes that they were running in college to be in a more expansive team, like a team that knows how to take advantage of players that didn't see that type of expansive role
and develop them. Yeah,
exactly.
I hear that. You said you liked Trey, but it sure didn't sound like it. I mean, for the most part, it was a pretty lukewarm, I think, evaluation, which I don't know. I don't think I'm too far away from that. I think I have a little more positive review on him. I not that he's like, shooting up to the top of my rankings or anything like that. Again, out of, 100 score, he got a 65.5. So, just above average, kind of average type deal there. But just getting into some of the, the notes here, I'll lead off with what you said about the press coverage note. For me, that is the lowest score in the route technique section for him, beating press. Doesn't exhibit dynamic ability off release to consistently beat press is my note on that. And so I agree with you there. However, I do think that he's got really good stem nuance, the leans through the middle of the route before the top of the route, good manipulation movement. So he's a patient route runner, applies pacing on most routes, almost baiting defenders, leverages defenders with physicality. Demonstrates manipulation movement and good stem nuance, as well as footwork, peak moves, throttle down, drops hips, cuts opposite direction. You see him leaning outside stem of route and working back over the defender, to stack him. I would like to see sharper cuts at the top of his routes, but I do think he gets the job done to an extent, and displays a good ability to create separation through savvy route running. So for the most part, I think he's a pretty good route runner. Good hands, away from the body, low throws, etc. Those different kind of things. You do see some drops downfield, probably talking about that LSU drop. So, I don't think it's his most polished skill set. Needs to improve ball tracking. So going back to, I think, some of what Jake was talking about there with maybe, not being the best with the downfield tracking and maybe better with the straight line throws. Not a ton of acrobatic catches to display body control or contested catches. There are some plays where he goes up and contorts, around defenders to secure a specific play, I think against LSU, but it's not really consistent. But he does convert contested catches fairly well, despite all that. Displays good, not great speed, not overly lateral, laterally agile after the catch. And I wouldn't describe him as elusive necessarily, though there is some of that, but more driven by contact balance and physicality. Just above average burst, I'd say, used mainly to separate through the stem of the route. He's really more of a vertical separator, and I think most evaluators would agree with that. And one thing worth noting here, just forced fed screens without a ton of success, in my opinion, like did not break many for long gains on any of the film I watched. And for Harris, I feel like he was a guy who I needed to get extra looks at. So I ended up watching like Kentucky, Wake Forest, Furman, LSU, and Georgia Southern. So I really wanted to get a good look at this guy to make sure that I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. And just, the final notes on savvy route runner, vertical separator, home run hitter, good, not great speed, lacks lateral agility and elusiveness, but displays contact balance and after the catch ability, exhibits manipulation movement and stem nuance, as well as above average hands. However, there are some concentration drops on tape more related to ball tracking downfield. Demonstrates great patience and pacing through route, which could be refined at the top of his routes. And what I said there was potentially compensating for lack of lateral agility, which could be, refined at the top of his routes. And last thing I said was, I'm not like the biggest player comp guy, but stylistically, I think he has a lot of Tyler Boyd in him, just like a little more dynamic maybe. But I think that is kind of how I saw him like playing in terms of his style. But either way, I'm not like the great or care about player comps that much, but Uriah, hop into his numbers because some of these are absolutely eye popping, like just some crazy numbers.
When it comes to yards per route run, man zone, all that, it's some of it's almost historic. But we'll hop into it. So yards after the catch per reception, 7.7. It's great. Pretty good number with the 12 ADOT. His slot usage, again, just much like Tet McMillan, Trey Harris was only in the slot 13.6%. So this is a guy like, I just need to see more of that in the NFL. Just typically the players that we see produce at a higher level will get a little bit more slot usage than that. But his yards per team pass attempt, 2.4. Yards per route run, 5.15. His man yards per route run, 8.7. Zone yards per route run, 4.28. Those are just almost comical. Like you just don't see that. It's crazy. His average dominator is 26.3. Ole Miss, I don't know exactly what kind of competition he has there, but didn't seem to matter. Contested catch rate, again, seemingly most of his targets will be downfield since he's not playing from the slot very often, but he's still catching at a clip of 61.5%. First down per route run is 18.5%, which is just a really, really insane number. And those are all things I'm very, very, very excited about. What was not very exciting is to go back and see that this dude played 5 years in college.
Late declare. Yeah. Very late.
Didn't break out until age 20, late declare, very late declare. They have him listed as a senior. I'm just like, hey, man, I hope this guy has his master's. Other than that, I mean, it really does matter. It doesn't matter as much with like tight ends and maybe even older quarterbacks is maybe becoming a better thing. But when it comes to wide receivers, one of the biggest signals for the things that, like, say, you'll measure at the combine, height, weight, 40, all that stuff. The one thing that has the biggest correlation to NFL success or not success for wide receivers is age. So unless he started college at like 16, it's concerning how old he is.
Unless he's a genius, it's concerning.
Yeah, I mean, academically, maybe he's just killing it, and I don't really know. Just everything else besides his age is phenomenal. Yeah. Phenomenal.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that, I mean, Jake and my evaluations line up pretty well, I think, from the sounds of it. Outside of my terrible comp, because like thinking back, like I'm not sure how I got Tyler Boyd out of that, but that's why we don't like comps, right? It doesn't really even make sense given how he plays. So it's very interesting why I went there. But that said, I think he's like an interesting combination of skill sets. Like there's good route technique, but then there's like parts of the route technique that aren't fully developed. And then there's like some good ball skills, but then there's some parts of it that are like, nah. And then it's like, he's good after the catch, but he's not that elusive. And it's like, so like, it's this strange combination of skill sets all in one player. And it's like, I think it could work, but I'm not all that confident that it will. And I think Jake's right. It needs to be in like a really specific situation where maybe they're going to scheme around him. He's not going to be the go-to receiver. He's going to be more the second, third option in offense where they have a good one and a good tight end, something like that, so you're hoping he gets into like a Shanahan style offense or something where somebody can really develop some of these skills.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I definitely leave probably a little bit more skeptical than most people. And this isn't a comp. This just reminds me a lot of kind of the general dominance that even someone like Troy Franklin had with regards to his high-end metrics. And like when you think about just the general usage, they kind of align pretty well, unfortunately. And just thinking about how vertical both of them were in college, that's kind of my biggest concern. Like I personally hate, and maybe that's why it's my own inherent bias, but like I personally hate overly vertical wide receivers because they deeply impact the game. Because when you have basically these cheat code guys in college, they are game breakers, but the game breakers don't translate typically to the NFL because they're not nuanced enough. So like when you have just a dude who can just break out and get that separation, it's not necessarily the separation that's really going to be, presented in an NFL format.
Yeah, I just one thing I'll say is I do think that he offers flashes, if not maybe even better than flashes, of good, nuance through the stem of the route and good manipulation movement. Granted, I agree that he's more of a vertical separator, vertical route tree, but those skills give me hope that he can kind of develop out a bit more, because those are the skills you need to get there. You know what I
That's
mean?
fair.
And so,
Yeah, that's fair.
those are things where like a lot of guys you see who are more one trick ponies don't really have that ability to, deceive defenders and really, play the game within the game kind of thing. And so, yeah, that's my last point on that. But I agree with you for the most part. But great stuff, guys. Like those are some really good breakdowns. I love it.
All right, it looks like we have a question from Tommy here and a couple trades that don't include me. So I'll let you guys finish out the rest of the
Don't
episode.
include me.
I mean, if it was mine, I'd stick around and talk about it, but I'll let you guys finish off.
All right. See you soon, Uriah.
See you soon.
Be easy, brother. Okay. And then there were two. All right. So Tommy's question: momentum fundamentally relies on physics. Does it exist in fantasy? If so, where and why? All right. Wow, Tommy really taking us there, huh? All right, we're doing some physics now. I like it. I feel like I've been blasted off into the atmosphere. I'm just hovering.
That strain's good.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, so momentum fundamentally relies on physics. Does it exist in fantasy? If so, where and why? Momentum. Yeah. I mean, what is the question? Do physics or does momentum exist in fantasy? I think momentum definitely exists in fantasy. That's where I'll take it. I think momentum in trades. I think that's kind of the cascading effect you see happening in leagues where like one trade gets made, and then, a couple follow-up trades happen, not always with the same manager, but usually one of the following trades will then have that same manager in there, and you can build on that momentum. I think in a draft, there can be momentum built based on, a few picks and knowing kind of where the board's falling. You're like, oh boy, I can really push this snowball down the hill here and build something. I think those are two areas that stick out to me. I'm trying to think if there's anywhere else. I mean, yeah, I don't know if you can control the point scoring momentum as much throughout the season. There probably are some ways to do that, really following the current season trends of player scoring. You could probably get into this, and build some momentum on that kind of thing. But I think it's more related to the first two I was going with. But what are your thoughts, Jake?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really awesome question, because I do think that, to Billy's point, there are multiple facets of momentum that kind of hit a fantasy landscape. I have two others that I actually thought of, and I think that's why these types of questions are actually really beneficial for us to just kind of talk through, because we're all different. We all define things differently. Mm-hmm. And so the big one that came to mind first is just like general roster construction and the like process of constructing your roster and moving it in a different direction, whatever that direction is. Like momentum is something that goes in two directions, right? Like positive and negative, in the sense of moving your team in one way or the other. One thing that I've noticed specifically when a lot of managers, including myself, when I first started playing Dynasty, are making moves specifically after startups, is like they're going really, really hard in the process of changing the momentum of their team, right? Like your team basically is as static as possible right after the startup, in my opinion. You're all kind of left at the same level, and tools like Dynasty Daddy will tell you what you could potentially do with it, but that doesn't actually result in anything. What a lot of times will happen is you'll now use all of that future draft capital to ensure that the momentum of your team actually increases to the place that you want it to. Now, the reality is, like any other space you want it to be in, you don't want to force all of that energy into it all at once, like, because you don't actually know what the pathway is going to be exactly like. So it's actually most beneficial, I find, to kind of sprinkle additional energy throughout the process, as dumb as that sounds, and
pace
kind
the
of
momentum. Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
ate it throughout the way. I think that's kind of where you'll see the most value. That was the first way that
Nurture the momentum. I like that. I like that a
Yeah.
lot. That's a good way to go about it. I dig that.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
And
you got?
then the second one, almost building off of what you were talking about with regards to general valuations of players. I think there are ways in which you can almost like anticipate momentum off of an asset. And I think like the way in which we see a player being moved. So, Dontavian Wicks was a great example because we talked about him earlier. The momentum of Dontavian Wicks was moving in almost the complete wrong direction of someone who would want to necessarily acquire him. So the idea would be if you do own that asset to get off of them in that specific window. And I've been talking a lot about this with a few buddies of mine offline. And it's like, there are going to be spaces in which I lose out on hitting that peak value. And I'm completely conscientious of that. But I'd more often not would rather just hit some form of profit, quote unquote profit, of seeing that momentum hit a certain threshold for myself and getting off to know that I can get into something better. And by better, I mean like getting into either something that's more fluid or liquid in as an asset, or truly getting into a better point scoring asset. So even last year, getting into so many, mid to even early second round valued players, including those picks, was a better direction than keeping on to Dontavian Wicks. And it isn't because I don't think that Dontavian Wicks could hit that same space. It's just that I know that those other assets have already done it, right? Like I know that those assets have already equaled to that space. So like, why go in a different direction to hope that I found, the one golden nugget that exists, and it might not. That would be the other form of momentum that I kind of envision in fantasy football specifically. And there's probably many others. There definitely are. And it's one of those things that like the more you think about how to take advantage of momentum, I think that's kind of where I see Tommy's question almost the best is like, there's going to be different gauges of it, right? And you're going to be able to measure it differently than somebody else. And that momentum itself should be almost your catalyst, your spark to being able to get ahead of your competition in however many ways you can.
Now, this is what I love about coming up with like different terms or trying to describe aspects of things in general. Like same thing with like, movement with, prospecting, right? You're trying to describe things, but this too, it allows you to, once you start describing it and calling it, saying, is there momentum in fantasy football? Then you start thinking of the ways you could take advantage of different things that you are describing as momentum. But for me, you hit the jackpot here where we'll call it asset momentum, right? The direction and probably more importantly, degree in which an asset is energized positive or negatively, right? And that degree may change the actionability of what you need to do, right? So like you're saying, okay, Dontavian Wicks momentum is in flux, but also more likely than not heading in a more negative energized direction, right? So it's like, do you want to hold on to that and ride that out? Or do you see this as being like, okay, let's get out before that occurs, like you're saying, and basically get the value that is no longer really there, and get off a risky asset. But I think once you think about it in this way, that momentum, like assets have momentum, just that baseline thought or that baseline, you say that to yourself, assets have momentum, then you can start thinking to yourself like which direction that momentum is going in and how you can take action based on those things. And so like I think that is something that we don't inherently think about. So you need to kind of force yourself to think about it that way.
Exactly. And we talked about two tight ends tonight. We talked about Travis Kelce and we talked about Brenton Strange. And just off of those conversations alone, it's just like there are spaces for you to take advantage of potentially being ahead of the curve. Like if someone doesn't know the momentum's there for Brenton Strange, maybe now's the time to get in. Maybe Travis Kelce is the opposite. If you have whatever inclination that there's another window for him to potentially sell off of, then you do it. I think that there's too much fear in which we interact with momentum and just all forms of physics that we just don't think that we have any control over things, because we don't in a lot of circumstances. But like in this one nuanced situation, you have complete control over when you get off of that piece. And like when I see kind of spaces hit thresholds that I'm comfortable getting off of, that's when I want to get off of them as fast as possible. But I also try not to make them too clear to the public.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's great points. And I think dynasty physics is real. Like, and you can interact with it and you can push it in different directions and utilize the momentum in different ways, right? Once you start recognizing that something has momentum, you can, there can be a reaction to that, I think, in both the real world and also in dynasty. And if you start looking at, it's kind of the study of how things are fundamentally constituted and how those interact in terms of like behaviors and motions. Like once you start thinking about it in that way, it kind of opens your mind up to the move. When we talk about momentum, now we're talking about the movement of value, right? But it gives you a different perspective on it when you start calling it something different like that. So I really appreciate the question from Tommy. Love that heady shit. That's right up our alley on Dynasty. It's right up our alley on Dynasty Underdog. So we really appreciate that, Tommy. Hopefully we answered that. Hopefully the answer suffice is answers your question there. I hope so. But we'll move on to some trades here. Some dynasty trades real quick. We have two of them. One post DU5 startup draft. Let's just jump right into it. JSN, who was drafted pretty highly, for the 107 and the 110. I would take JSN here personally. I thought this was a pretty low price for JSN. I tried something like this in a different league. It didn't work out, but I liked this when I saw it get done. I was like, wow, this is that's a good value for JSN, and specifically for the league format. First downs, you're getting points per first down, and you're also getting that 1 point per reception for the receiver. So I think it's a really good move for that player. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of those trades that kind of makes sense in a vacuum. Getting into those two firsts again, this is one of those trades that really helps the team. I believe it was CF Gordo's team, actually. He got off of JSN for 2 firsts. He's realistically not trying to compete year one. I thought that this actually made a lot of sense. I do agree that it's a little on the cheaper side. Probably could have added even a second onto this and felt a little bit more comfortable. But I'm just thinking about this in comparison to early offseason trade that I got done. I traded away JSN for the 103, a 26 second, and a third. And I think I still would rather the 103, the 26 second, and the third than the 107, the 110. So I guess that's kind of how my brain just kind of reads this. And the picks are more valuable now, quote unquote. That's the line of logic, but the picks have a very defined value based off of the startup. So I guess the way that I see it moving forward is you traded away the 310 and you ended up getting the 610 and I believe it was the 610 and one other pick. I can't read now.
I don't have it up in front of me
Yeah,
anymore.
it's on me. I had it in my head and then I lost it. But anyway,
it had to be a 7th or an 8th round pick. It was probably a 6th and an 8th.
I'm just not seeing it. That's the problem. I don't see another kicker.
Because it probably got traded.
It's literally back to back. Sorry, it was basically back to back picks. I was just looking at the wrong row. So it was either the 609 and the 74 for the 310. And I could see it, but I just wouldn't do it. This is not a trade in the startup that I would do. I'd rather the 3rd round pick and stick with it and just see if I can get better value for that asset. But either way, I kind of like the pick, knowing that he's going on productive struggle, potentially wanting to kind of take away the points. He probably will be a relatively high scoring asset this year. So I don't hate it, but it's not my favorite way out.
Yeah, contextually, it makes more sense, but I still think you could have extracted a little bit more value out of JSN, especially just leveraging where he was picked in the draft. Just this is a top 4 pick or top, 3 round pick, whatever. Like I need significant value back for this, not just too late first, is how I would have kind of phrased it, try to push it that way.
Fair.
But still, I think it's a fair enough deal. I think you're right. It's probably fair enough, but I like the JSN side. We'll move on to one more. I think this was in maybe our League of Legends.
Yes.
League. Yeah. And so this was Jerry Jeudy plus Eric All for the 112 and the 412. And this is probably fairly close, but for me, I'm just like, I don't know, like Jerry Jeudy. I think the crazy scoring last year was more of a product of situation and Jameis Winston just, slinging it nonstop. I think Jerry Jeudy is a fine player. I've always been actually on the Jerry Jeudy side of things. I think he's a good player. I think he's a good player, but and a really quality route runner. But I kind of think resetting in terms of dynasty value and dynasty assets is not a bad idea. Maybe you could have exceeded. The only thing is that I know the context of this trade, and I know that it was basically sent and accepted. It was just sent to the person who owned Jerry Jeudy, and it was accepted. In that case, I would have sent back, Jerry Jeudy, maybe take Eric All out of it for the 112 plus, a second round pick or something like that. I would have felt more comfortable with it. Or even just keep Eric All in there and said, the 112 plus the 203 or 202. I think I looked at it, and that might have been an available package, and that I would have felt a lot more comfortable with. But still, I think I kind of lean the pick here, but I could be persuaded either way. What do you think, Jake?
Yeah, I'm taking the picks on this. I've always been off on Jerry Jeudy. I think, he had a really fantastic statistical season last year. I just don't really like the situation in Cleveland. They would basically have to go Cam Ward in this draft for me to feel slightly more positive about him having a productive year this year. Even the veterans that are available for them to bring in, I don't particularly see unless they bring back Jameis, which I don't think is going to happen considering how many times they benched him for Dorian Thompson Robinson. Did I get that right? DTR.
Yeah.
And then
they were trying to lose games, but yeah.
Yeah, they were trying to lose games. I get it, but like also at the same time, like I just don't see it. I don't foresee it. I think they don't want the pastor in the clubhouse anymore. And there's a different direction. But that all being said, I don't hate this trade either. Like I think that this is like one of those situations where it can make sense. It's thinking about the league structure and like the way that these teams are kind of interacting with the rest of the league. I just don't understand the trade and getting off of the 112 and the 412 for those two assets. You already know that Eric All is basically a dead asset for all of 2025 because he's going to be out for the whole season. So like, I don't know. It's just like one of those perplexing moves that
Jake is disgusted.
I'm not just. It's not being disgusted. This is like going back to even like my point before. Like try and learn your own intent when you're making trades. Like
there doesn't seem to be any intent there. Like the intent is like Jerry Jeudy. You look at the scoring and you're like, holy shit, I want that on my team. That has to be the intent. Like if you're thinking about it, like that's the logic that you go through. Is like I think he can do this. I think he's figured it out. He broke out, right? Like that is the narrative you're telling yourself if you're buying him. And the 112 is a fairly acceptable cost to move off of in that world that you're living in there, right? You're like, oh, that's pretty cheap for 20 to 30 points a game, which is not what you're going to get out of Jerry Jeudy. No, of course not. But I'm just working through the logic of like,
no, I know.
That's what, but there's no other scenario that you spend it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's what it is, but I agree. We don't think that's going to happen. So yeah. But I agree with you. Think about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and really thoroughly think through it. And I think you might not make that deal is your point.
Yeah, exactly. This feels like it's reactive. And that's literally what's happened in that league. And I think that's what's happened to this owner is like, they've made a bunch of moves and they've almost picked up the wrong momentum to bring that back up. It's like
actually great point. This person, it has a ton of momentum behind their back and almost so much momentum they can't stop themselves. Which
literally
is
Yeah.
no, I'm not like that is, I think sometimes you do that where basically what's happened here is the person won the league and then is leaning the complete opposite direction at full speed, like at, hyper speed. They press the button and they can't stop it. And like, that's, I think, a really, really good piggyback off of the, or full circle moment, let's say, off of the momentum conversation. Coming back to it is recognize where momentum occurs in Dynasty and recognize that it is a real thing and that you have some control over it, especially your own momentum in this situation, that you can pull back the reins a little bit, pull up the mast and stop the ship from really going full speed ahead. You like that imagery?
I did.
So yeah, full circle, bringing the momentum back to the end here. I think that's going to do it for us. Jake, you have any final thoughts before we get out of here?
No, see you in like 6 months.
Oh my goodness. I hate to hear that, but I love that you popped in for this one. You did your best to create a 2-hour show. We are 15 minutes from that. So you did a
Proud
really
of
good job.
myself.
I think you passed the threshold where you can call yourself a winner, but
Or a
we
rambling
appreciate
man.
Rambling man. Yeah. I appreciate
Yeah.
you being here. I love doing the prospect profiles when all three of us are here. I think the dynamic is really good, really fun. So I had a great time tonight talking about those players. Hope
Same.
everybody else enjoyed it. If any of the listeners have any, players they would like us to go over, totally, shoot us some ideas. We'll eventually get to them for sure, but we'll prioritize those for, some future episodes. Other than that, just hop in the Discord. If you aren't there already, we love talking to you guys. Hop on the YouTube channel, chat with us, send us comments. We'll talk about them on the show, all that good stuff. But yeah, follow us on the socials at Dynasty Underdog. You can find all of our handles there. On Twitter and on Blue Sky, or probably anywhere else that you're roaming around. But that's it. We're getting out of here. Peace out. Appreciate everybody. Catch you next time.